The morning sun was just creeping over the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges as I pulled my old pickup truck into the gravel driveway of my beachfront property. The familiar crunch of tires on stone was a sound I'd come to love, a signal that I was home, back to the one place in the world that felt like it was truly mine. The air was thick with the briny scent of the ocean, and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore was like a heartbeat, steady and eternal. This was my sanctuary, a slice of coastal paradise passed down through 3 generations of my family, grandfather, father, me. It wasn't just land, it was a legacy, a tangible piece of history I could touch, smell, and hear every day. I'd spent years tending to it, from scrubbing barnacles off the wooden pier to repainting the weathered slats of the tiki bar my grandfather built with his own hands back in 1963. Every inch of this place was sacred to me, a connection to people and moments long gone, but never forgotten. I stepped out of the truck, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, ready to settle into my usual morning ritual, a slow walk along the shore, checking the dock for loose boards, maybe tossing a line into the water if the mood struck. The beach was quiet, save for the gulls wheeling overhead and the occasional slap of a wave against the pilings. It was the kind of peace you can't buy, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I'd bought this land long before the neighborhood around it started sprouting McMansions and gated communities, before the Homeowners Association, HOA, as everyone called it, came along with their clipboards and their rules about mailbox colors and lawn heights. Back then, it was just me, the sand, and the sea. I never needed a fence to keep people out because my neighbors, the few there were, respected boundaries. They knew this was my land, my family's land, and that was enough. But that morning, something was off. I sensed it before I saw it, a prickling at the back of my neck, like the air itself was holding its breath. As I rounded the corner of the boathouse, my eyes caught a flash of color that didn't belong, a bright, garish sign staked into the ground near the driftwood archway that marked the entrance to my beach. The archway itself was a relic, its cedar posts weathered to a silvery gray, carved with my grandfather's initials in a moment of pride after he'd first claimed this land. The sign was an abomination, all glossy white with bold black letters screaming, "For sale. Luxury beachfront lots, inquire within." My heart stuttered. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misread it, but the words didn't change. Luxury lots? On my land? The land I'd never even considered selling. Not for $1 million, not for 10 million. I took a step closer, my coffee mug forgotten in my hand, and that's when I heard it. Voices, a whole chorus of them, cheerful and excited, drifting over from the beach. I followed the sound, my boots sinking into the soft sand, and what I saw next made my stomach lurch. There was a crowd, maybe a dozen people, milling around on my property, right there on the stretch of shoreline I'd walked 1,000 times. They were dressed like they'd just stepped out of a real estate brochure, all khakis and sunglasses, clutching clipboards and pointing at the water like they were already picking out spots for their future vacation homes. Some were snapping photos of the dock, others were pacing off distances, and one guy in a polo shirt was even sketching something on a notepad, muttering about prime waterfront access. At the center of it all, like a ringmaster in a circus I hadn't bought a ticket for, was a woman I recognized immediately, Karen Mallerie, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood's HOA. She was unmistakable, all blonde hair piled high, a pastel pink suit that screamed, "I'm in charge," and a pair of heels so impractical for the beach they were sinking into the sand with every step. She was waving her arms like she was conducting an orchestra, her voice carrying over the waves as she pointed out features of my land. "This dock is perfect for private boating," she said, gesturing to the pier I'd spent last summer reinforcing. "And over here, the tiki bar, such a charming addition, fully included in the package." The crowd nodded along, eating it up, and one woman in a wide-brimmed hat even clapped, like Karen had just unveiled the 8th wonder of the world. I stood there, frozen, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. Karen was selling my beach. My family's beach. The beach where my grandfather taught me to fish, where my dad and I rebuilt the boathouse after a hurricane, where I'd scattered their ashes after they passed, promising to keep this place safe. And here was this woman, this stranger who'd never so much as set foot on my property before today, acting like she owned every grain of sand. I felt a hot flush of anger creeping up my neck, but I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe she'd gotten the wrong address, confused my land with some undeveloped lot the HOA actually controlled. But deep down, I knew better. Karen wasn't the type to make mistakes. She was the type to make power grabs. I started walking toward the group, my boots kicking up little clouds of sand, and that's when Karen spotted me. Her smile didn't falter, not even a flicker. Instead, she waved at me like we were old pals, her manicured hand slicing through the air. "Oh, there you are," she called, loud enough for the whole group to hear. "I was hoping to catch you. We've had some very promising interest in your property." The crowd turned to look at me, their faces a mix of curiosity and expectation, like I was about to confirm the deal of the century. I stopped a few feet away, my coffee now cold in my hand, and stared at her. "My what now?" I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through her cheer. She laughed, a high, tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "Your section of the coast, of course. I knew you'd want to be a part of something bigger." The HOA finally approved the Coastal Integration Plan, and this, she swept her arm toward the ocean, like she was presenting a gift. "This is the crown jewel." I blinked, my mind racing to keep up with her nonsense. Coastal Integration Plan? I'd never heard of it. I wasn't part of the HOA, never had been. My land predated their existence, and I'd made damn sure to keep it that way. "That's my land, Karen," I said, slow and deliberate, so there'd be no mistake. "It's not for sale. Never was. How the hell are you even showing this to people?" Her smile tightened, just a fraction, but she didn't miss a beat. She crossed her arms, her clipboard tucked under one elbow, and tilted her head like I was a child who didn't understand the rules. "It's undeveloped," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "Technically, it's non-conforming under HOA environmental use policies. You've left it open to community interaction for years, so we assumed it was unclaimed for public integration. You don't even have a perimeter fence." The crowd murmured, nodding like she'd just dropped some profound legal truth, and I felt my fists clench at my sides. A fence? I didn't have a fence because I didn't need one. This wasn't a gated community. It was a small coastal town where people still respected deeds and history. Or at least, they used to. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Karen, I own this land. I have the deed, the surveys, the tax records, everything. It's been in my family since before you were born. You're trespassing, and you're misleading these people." I gestured to the group, who were starting to look a little less certain, their clipboards lowering as they sensed the tension. Karen's smile didn't budge, but her eyes narrowed, just enough to show she wasn't used to being challenged. "Oh, I'm sure we can work this out," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "The buyers are very excited." In fact, she turned to the group, her voice brightening. "Let's take a closer look at the dock. Boats can be moored here overnight, as long as they're HOA registered." That was it. The last thread of my patience snapped. She was branding my dock, my asterisk dock, built by my grandfather's sweat and nails, as some kind of HOA amenity. I stepped forward, planting myself between her and the tiki bar, my voice dropping to a growl. "Karen, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the sheriff. You're not selling my land, and you're not turning my dock into your little HOA playground." For the first time, her composure cracked. She laughed again, but it was colder, sharper, like she was daring me to follow through. "Call whoever you like," she said, flipping open a folder in her hand. "The sale's already pending." I froze. "What sale?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smirked, holding up the folder like it was a trophy. "I've taken deposits from 3 families. Preliminary down payments to secure their parcels. Nothing official yet, but we're moving forward. The crowd was silent now, their excitement replaced by confusion, and I could feel the weight of their stares on me. Deposits? She'd taken money, actual money, for pieces of my land, my family's legacy, without so much as a phone call to check if it was legal. I couldn't speak for a moment. The rage was so thick it choked me. Finally, I managed, "You sold my land? You sold land you don't own." Karen raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Prove it," she said, and with that, she turned on her heel and walked toward the dock, her group trailing behind her like obedient ducklings. I stood there, alone in the sand, watching them climb into their golf carts and SUVs, their voices fading as they drove off. The sign was still there, crooked and ugly, nailed into my grandfather's archway. I yanked it down with one hard pull, the wood splintering under the force, and tossed it into the trash bin by the boathouse. But the damage was done. Karen had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and now I was staring down the barrel of a fight I hadn't asked for. That morning, as the sun climbed higher and the waves kept their steady rhythm, I realized something. This wasn't just about a sign or a tour group. This was about entitlement, about someone who thought she could rewrite history because she had a clipboard and a title. Karen Mallerie wasn't just selling my beach. She was trying to erase my family's story, to turn a legacy into a commodity. And she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated me. I wasn't some pushover who'd roll over for her HOA nonsense. I was the grandson of a man who'd built a tiki bar with his bare hands, the son of a man who'd taught me to fight for what's mine. Karen had started this war, but I was going to finish it. I went back to the house, my coffee long forgotten, and started pulling files from the fireproof safe in my office. The deed, the surveyor's plat, the tax receipts, they were all there, a paper trail stretching back to 1938, when my grandfather first staked his claim. I called my lawyer, Janine, a woman who ate HOA bullies for breakfast and had a reputation for making entitled people regret crossing her clients. When I told her what happened, she didn't laugh or gasp. She just paused, like she was savoring the audacity of it. "This woman committed fraud in broad daylight," she said finally, her voice practically vibrating with glee. "This is going to be fun." As I hung up the phone, I looked out the window at the beach, at the tiki bar glowing in the morning light, at the dock stretching into the water like a promise. This was my land, my home, my history. Karen thought she could take it because I didn't have a fence, because I didn't play by her HOA rules. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make sure she never forgot the name of the man whose beach she tried to steal. The fight was on, and I was ready to bring everything I had. The rest of that day was a blur of phone calls and planning. I ordered signs of my own big, bold, legal-grade ones that would leave no room for misinterpretation. I called a surveyor to come out and mark the boundaries, just in case Karen tried to claim some kind of clerical error. I even got in touch with a guy who flew drones for real estate photos, figuring a bird's-eye view of her trespassing would be handy in court. Every step I took was fueled by a mix of anger and determination, a fire that burned hotter with every memory of my grandfather's stories about this place. He'd fought storms and squatters to keep this land. I'd fight Karen and her HOA to do the same. By the time the sun set, I was exhausted but resolute. I stood on the dock, the water lapping at the pilings, and looked out at the horizon. The beach was quiet again, but it didn't feel like mine anymore, not yet. Karen had tainted it, turned it into a battlefield. But I'd take it back. I'd make it mine again, not just for me, but for the generations that came before me and the ones that might come after. This was more than a property dispute. It was a stand for something bigger, something Karen would never understand. And as the stars began to prick the darkening sky, I made a promise to myself. She'd regret the day she set foot on my sand. The sun was barely up, casting a pale golden glow over the beach when I sat down at my kitchen table, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand and a fire in my chest that wouldn't quit. The events of yesterday, Karen Mallerie's brazen attempt to sell my family's beachfront land right under my nose, had left me sleepless, my mind churning with a mix of disbelief and raw, unfiltered anger. That woman, with her pastel suit and her HOA clipboard, had crossed a line most people wouldn't even dream of approaching. She hadn't just trespassed, she'd tried to steal a legacy, my legacy, and pass it off as some kind of community grab bag. The image of her waving at that tour group, pointing at my dock and my grandfather's tiki bar like she owned them, was burned into my brain. But if Karen thought she could bulldoze me with her smug entitlement, she was about to get a hard lesson in reality. This wasn't her HOA playground. This was my land, my family's blood and sweat, and I was ready to fight tooth and nail to protect it. I took a sip of coffee, the bitter heat grounding me, and spread out the contents of my fireproof safe across the table. The documents were old, some yellowed at the edges, but they were ironclad. The original deed from 1938, when my grandfather first bought this stretch of coastline. Surveyor's plat maps from the 1940s, meticulously hand-drawn. Tax receipts going back decades, even a faded photograph of my grandfather standing on the newly built dock, a grin on his face and a fishing pole in his hand. These weren't just papers, they were proof, a chain of ownership that predated Karen, her HOA, and every one of her ridiculous coastal integration fantasies. I ran my fingers over the deed, tracing the looping signature of the county clerk who'd stamped it all those years ago. This was my shield, my sword, and I was going to use it to bury Karen's scam so deep she'd never dig her way out. I picked up my phone and dialed Janine, my lawyer, a woman whose reputation for dismantling HOA tyrants was the stuff of local legend. Janine was a bulldog in a blazer, the kind of attorney who could make a grown man sweat just by raising an eyebrow. I'd known her for years, ever since she helped my dad settle a boundary dispute with a neighbor who thought he could claim a corner of our land for his shed. She'd won that fight in under a week, and I knew she'd be itching to take on Karen's nonsense. When she answered, her voice was crisp, like she'd been up for hours already. "What's got you calling this early?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her tone. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid it all out. Karen's tour group, the for sale sign nailed into my driftwood archway, her claim that my land was unclaimed because I didn't have a fence, and, most infuriatingly, her admission that she'd already taken deposits from 3 families for parcels she had no right to sell. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then Janine let out a low, disbelieving whistle. "This woman committed fraud in broad daylight," she said, her voice practically vibrating with glee. "She didn't just trespass, she's selling property she doesn't own, taking money for it, and slapping an HOA stamp on the whole thing like it's legitimate. This is going to be fun." I could almost hear her rubbing her hands together, already mapping out the legal battlefield. "Give me everything you've got," she said. "Deeds, surveys, photos, anything that proves this land is yours. And if you've got any record of her on your property, even better. We're going to hit her so hard she'll wish she'd never heard of your beach." I spent the next hour scanning and emailing Janine every document I had, along with a detailed account of what I'd seen and heard. I included photos I'd snapped on my phone, the sign hammered into my archway, the tour group traipsing across my sand, Karen's smug wave as she called my land the crown jewel. I even dug up an old email from the county zoning office, sent years ago when I checked to make sure my property was exempt from HOA jurisdiction. It was, of course, my grandfather had been smart enough to secure that exemption when the neighborhood first started organizing. Janine texted back within minutes. "This is gold. She's got nothing to stand on. I'll start drafting a cease and desist today. In the meantime, lock down your property. Signs, cameras, whatever it takes." She's not done yet. Janine's warning stuck with me. Karen wasn't the type to back down, not when she'd already doubled down by taking money from strangers. I needed to move fast to make it crystal clear that this land wasn't up for grabs. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for local sign companies, looking for something bold, professional, and impossible to ignore. I settled on a place that specialized in legal-grade property markers, the kind used for construction sites and private estates. I ordered a dozen signs, each one 3 feet by 2 feet, with bright red borders and black letters that screamed, "Private property. No trespassing. Not affiliated with HOA." I paid extra for rush delivery and installation, making sure they'd be up by the next morning. If Karen wanted to play real estate queen, she was going to do it somewhere else. Next, I called a surveyor I'd worked with a few years back, a grizzled guy named Mike who'd mapped out my property line after a storm shifted some of the dunes. Mike was old school, the kind of guy who carried a pencil behind his ear and could read a plat map like it was a novel. When I explained the situation, he let out a bark of laughter. "You're telling me this HOA lady's trying to sell your beach? The one your granddad fought the county to keep? Oh, man, she's in for a world of hurt." He agreed to come out the next day with his crew, promising to stake the boundaries and produce a fresh survey report that would hold up in any court. "I'll bring the good equipment," he said. "We'll make it so clear even a blind lawyer couldn't miss it." But I wasn't stopping there. Janine's mention of evidence had sparked an idea. If Karen was bold enough to bring a tour group onto my land, she'd probably be back, and I wanted to catch her in the act. I remembered a buddy of mine, Tom, who ran a drone photography business for real estate listings. His drones could capture high-definition video from angles no ground camera could match, and they were quiet enough not to spook anyone. I called him up, explained the situation, and asked if he could set up a drone to monitor the beach. Tom didn't hesitate. "You're saying some HOA Karen's trying to hawk your granddad's land? Hell yeah, I'm in. I'll have a drone up there tomorrow morning, looping the shoreline. If she so much as steps on your sand, we'll have it in 4K. With the signs, surveyors, and drone in motion, I felt like I was building an arsenal, each piece a step towards shutting Karen down for good. But there was one more thing nagging at me: the people she'd scammed. Those 3 families who'd handed over deposits, thinking they were buying a piece of my beach. I couldn't stop picturing them, their excitement turning to confusion as Karen spun her lies. I didn't know who they were, but I knew they were victims, just like me, caught in her web of delusion. I decided to reach out to the county zoning office, figuring they might have heard something about Karen's coastal integration plan. If she was telling buyers the land was zoned for development, the county would know it was a lie. My property was protected under a coastal conservation clause that dated back to the 1970s. I called the zoning office and got through to a supervisor named Carla, a no-nonsense woman who dealt with her fair share of HOA complaints. When I explained what Karen was doing, Carla's voice tightened. "You're saying she's selling lots on your private property? And claiming it's part of an HOA development?" I confirmed, giving her the details, the sign, the tour, the deposits. Carla let out a long sigh. "We've had a few calls already," she admitted. "People asking about zoning exemptions for beachfront estates in your area." I told them there's no such thing, not on protected shoreline. "Sounds like she's been telling buyers she can work something out with us." That's a big problem. She promised to set up an urgent meeting for the next day and asked me to bring any documents I had. "If she's misrepresenting land use," Carla said, "she's not just in trouble with you. She's in trouble with the state." That call lit a new fire under me. Karen wasn't just scamming me, she was scamming the system, lying to buyers about laws she had no power to bend. I started thinking about the bigger picture, about how her actions could ripple out, hurting innocent people who trusted her. I imagined families saving up for their dream home, only to find out their deposit was gone, tied up in a fraud they didn't see coming. It made my blood boil, but it also sharpened my resolve. This wasn't just about protecting my land anymore, it was about stopping a con artist before she could do more damage. As the morning wore on, I headed back to the beach, needing to see it, to feel it under my feet. The sand was cool, the waves steady, but the sight of that empty spot where Karen's sign had been was a stark reminder of what I was up against. I walked the length of the property, checking every inch like I was guarding a fortress. The tiki bar stood proud, its weathered wood a testament to my grandfather's craftsmanship. The dock stretched into the water, solid and unyielding, just like my determination. I paused at the driftwood archway, running my hand over the splintered spot where her sign had been nailed. It felt like a wound, a violation, but it also felt like a call to action. That's when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I turned, expecting maybe Mike or Tom arriving early, but instead, I saw a silver SUV pulling up near my mailbox. A couple stepped out, both in their late 40s, dressed like they'd just come from a beach vacation. Sneakers dusted with sand, sunglasses perched on their heads, a folder clutched in the woman's hand. They looked around, uncertain, like they were trying to match the landscape to a picture in their minds. I walked toward them, keeping my tone neutral but firm. "Can I help you folks?" I asked. The woman jumped slightly, startled, but the man stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm Greg Evans," he said. "This is my wife, Linda. We're the Evans family. Karen said we could come take a look at our lot." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face steady. "Your lot," I repeated, glancing at the folder in Linda's hand. Greg nodded, opening it to reveal a glossy mock-up of my property, complete with plot numbers and fake landscaping. My dock was there, my tiki bar, even the dune grass I'd spent years protecting. They'd labeled their spot Lot 3, Ocean View Serenity. There was nothing serene about the rage building in my chest. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I hate to break it to you, but this land's not for sale. Never has been. Karen had no right to show it, and she definitely had no right to take any money for it." Linda's face went pale, her hand tightening on the folder. "But we gave her a deposit," she said, her voice trembling. $5,000. She said it was refundable only if we backed out for personal reasons. Greg's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to the mock-up, then back to me. "She said this was legitimate," he muttered, his voice thick with betrayal. I felt their panic like a weight on my shoulders, but I also felt a surge of clarity. These were the people Karen had hurt, the ones who'd believed her lies. I offered to show them the deed, pulling it up on my phone from the scans I'd sent Janine. I pointed to the new signs, already on their way, and explained the situation as calmly as I could. "This is my land," I said. "My family's had it for nearly a century. Karen's running a scam, and I'm working with a lawyer to stop her. You should get your money back, and you should get your own lawyer." Linda nodded, tears in her eyes, while Greg took photos of the deed and the spot where Karen's sign had been. "You'll be hearing from us," he said, his voice hard. "Or from our attorney." As they drove away, I stood there, the waves crashing behind me, and felt the weight of what Karen had done settle in. She hadn't just tried to steal from me, she'd dragged innocent people into her delusion, people who trusted her, who dreamed of a life by the sea. I imagined her sitting at home, her laptop open to a spreadsheet of fake parcel numbers, a column of deposits growing with every lie she told. She wasn't just entitled, she was criminal, and I was going to make sure she paid for it. Back at the house, I called Janine again, updating her on the Evans family and their deposit. She was already one step ahead, drafting the cease and desist letter and arranging for a process server to deliver it to Karen within 48 hours. "This is textbook fraud," she said, her voice brimming with confidence. She took money, impersonated ownership, and misrepresented zoning laws. "You give me the green light, and I'll contact the DA's office. We can make this a criminal case." I didn't hesitate. "Green light," I said. "Let's end this." I hung up and went back to the table, staring at the documents spread out like a war map. The deed, the surveys, the photos, they were more than proof. They were my family's story, etched in ink and paper. Karen thought she could erase that story with a sign and a smile, but she'd underestimated me. She'd underestimated the weight of history, the strength of a man fighting for what's his. I wasn't just going to stop her. I was going to make sure she never forgot the name of the beach she tried to steal. The signs were coming, The drone was ready, the surveyors were on their way, and Janine was sharpening her legal knives. Karen's little power trip was about to crash into a wall of truth, and I was going to be there when it did. The morning after I'd set my plan in motion, I woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, a rhythm that usually calmed me but today felt like a drumbeat for war. The memory of Karen Mallerie's smug face, her pastel suit, and her audacity to sell my family's beachfront land was a fire in my gut that wouldn't die. She'd crossed every line, trespassing, lying, taking deposits from innocent families for land she didn't own, and now she was about to learn what happens when you try to steal a man's legacy. My kitchen table was still covered with the documents I'd pulled from the safe. The 1938 deed, surveyor's maps, tax receipts, all proof that this beach was mine, handed down from my grandfather to my father to me. I'd already unleashed Janine, my lawyer, who was drafting a cease and desist letter, and I had surveyors, signs, and a drone on the way to lock down my property. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to slink away after one confrontation. She was a bulldozer in heels, and I was bracing for her next move. I sipped my coffee, staring out at the tiki bar glowing in the dawn light, its weathered wood a testament to my grandfather's hands. The dock stretched into the water, solid as ever, a reminder of the storms this land had weathered, literal and now figurative. I'd thought the signs I'd ordered, bold and legal grade, would be enough to stop her. I'd thought the drone footage Tom was setting up would scare her off. But as I stepped onto the porch, the air felt heavy, like the calm before a hurricane. I was right to be wary. Karen wasn't just ignoring my warnings, she was escalating, and she was doing it in a way that made my blood run cold. It was Thursday morning, the sky still caught between gray and blue, when I heard the rumble of engines. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck, maybe the sign company arriving early. But the sound grew louder, mechanical, aggressive, accompanied by the unmistakable beep 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 of heavy machinery in reverse. I bolted outside, barefoot, my coffee mug still in hand, and froze at the sight unfolding on my beach. A yellow bulldozer was carving a jagged path through the dunes, its blade ripping through the sand like a knife through flesh. A dump truck, its bed piled high with gravel and cinder blocks, was backing toward the shoreline, dangerously close to my dock. 3 men in reflective vests were digging a trench, their shovels flashing in the early light, cutting a line from the road straight to the edge of my property. And there, in the center of it all, clipboard in hand, stood Karen, shouting orders like a general commanding an invasion. My mind couldn't process it at first. This wasn't a tour group or a sign. This was destruction, deliberate and brazen, happening on my land in broad daylight. I stormed down the path, my bare feet sinking into the sand, my voice roaring before I even reached her. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, waving my phone like a weapon. "You're trespassing. You're violating a cease and desist, and you're destroying my property." Karen turned, her face a mask of smug victory, not an ounce of shame in her eyes. "We're exercising emergency access installation," she said smoothly, like she'd rehearsed it. Her HOA emergency preparedness guidelines. "We need a proper road for fire and medical vehicles in case of a coastal incident. You'll thank us when it saves your house." I stared at her, my jaw slack, unable to believe the gall. "Are you out of your mind?" I snapped. "There's no authorization for this. That's my land you're ripping apart." She tapped her clipboard, her lips curling into a smirk. "The HOA approved it," she said, as if that settled everything. That was the moment I lost it. My vision narrowed, the world shrinking to just me, her, and the bulldozer tearing through my dunes. I didn't care about her clipboard or her HOA nonsense. This was my family's beach, and she was treating it like a sandbox for her ego. I pulled out my phone and started dialing, first the sheriff, then the county zoning office, then Janine. I wasn't going to let her get away with this, not for a second. The construction crew, sensing the storm brewing, slowed their work, their eyes darting between me and Karen. One of them, a guy with a gray beard and a hard hat, approached me cautiously. "Look, man," he said, keeping his voice low, "we were told this was HOA land. We got a work order saying it's cleared for emergency access. If this is your property, we'll stop." I pointed at the flattened sign in the sand, one of the ones I'd posted just yesterday, now crushed under tire tracks. "That's my sign," I said. "This is my land." "You're being lied to." The guy nodded, his face hardening, and signaled to the others to shut down the equipment. The bulldozer's engine died with a groan, and the sudden silence was deafening. Karen, of course, wasn't having it. She marched over, her heels sinking deeper with every step, and jabbed a finger at the crew. "You're under contract," she barked. "Keep working, or you'll be in breach." The bearded guy crossed his arms, unimpressed. "Lady, if this man owns the land, we're not touching it until it's sorted out. I'm not getting sued over your mess." Karen's face flushed red, but before she could launch into another tirade, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up on the gravel road, its lights flashing. The deputy, a stocky guy named Rodriguez who'd grown up in this town, stepped out and took one look at the scene. Me, barefoot and furious, Karen, clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, and a construction crew standing idle next to a half-dug trench. Rodriguez listened as I explained everything: Karen's tour, the fake sales, the cease and desist she'd been served, and now this bulldozers tearing up my protected dunes. I showed him the deed on my phone, the surveyor's map, and the photos of her sign from 2 days ago. Karen tried to interrupt, spouting some nonsense about HOA jurisdiction and public safety easements, but Rodriguez shut her down with a raised hand. "Ma'am, you were served a cease and desist," he said, his voice flat. "You're trespassing, and this," he gestured to the bulldozer, "is vandalism. Pack it up, or I'm citing you right now." Karen sputtered, throwing out buzzwords like civil codes and eminent domain, but it was no use. The crew was already loading their tools, and Rodriguez stood there, arms crossed, until they drove off. I walked the damage with Rodriguez, my stomach churning as I saw the full extent of what they'd done. The bulldozer had torn through a patch of dune grass that had been growing undisturbed for over 20 years, a delicate ecosystem that stabilized the shoreline. Deep tire tracks scarred the sand, some dangerously close to a nesting zone for federally protected piping plovers, their tiny footprints barely visible among the wreckage. The trench was a gash, raw and ugly, cutting through the heart of my property. I took photos of everything, every broken blade of grass, every tread mark, every cinder block left behind, and sent them to Janine and the Coastal Land Trust, an organization I'd contacted after Carla at the zoning office tipped me off. They were already on high alert, and this was the kind of violation they'd been dreading. By noon, Janine was on the phone, her voice a mix of outrage and excitement. "This isn't just fraud anymore," she said. "She's caused environmental damage on protected land. That's a state-level offense, maybe federal if those bird nests are impacted. I'm looping in the Department of Environmental Protection. You keep documenting photos, videos, drone footage, everything. We're building a case that'll bury her." I gave her the green light to go nuclear, and she promised to have the cease and desist delivered to Karen's doorstep by a process server that afternoon. "She's not just losing this fight," Janine said. "She's losing everything." The Coastal Land Trust didn't waste time either. By the next day, they'd sent a biologist named Dr. Ellis, a wiry guy with sunburned skin and a clipboard of his own, not the HOA kind, but one filled with data on dune ecosystems and migratory birds. He walked the beach with me, his face growing grimmer with every step. "This is bad," he muttered, crouching to inspect the crushed grass. "These dunes are part of a migratory path for shorebirds. You can't just run a bulldozer through them like it's a parking lot. And those tracks," he pointed to the tire marks near the nesting zone. "They're within 50 feet of protected habitat. She's looking at serious fines, maybe more." I handed him the drone footage Tom had sent me, a crystal-clear video of the bulldozer rolling in, Karen directing traffic, and the exact moment the crew ran over my sign. Dr. Ellis shook his head. almost in disbelief. "This is going to cost her more than she realizes," he said. The fallout came fast. By the end of the week, the county issued an emergency injunction, declaring my property off limits to any unauthorized personnel. The beach itself was now under review for designation as a protected conservation area, a status that would block any development, construction, or alteration without state approval. It was a death blow to Karen's dreams of coastal dominance, and the timing couldn't have been worse for her. Janine called me the day the court filings went public. 3 families, including the Evanses, were suing Karen for fraud, breach of contract, and damages. They had everything: text messages, receipts, bank transfers, even a recorded phone call where Karen referred to my land as pre-approved beachfront pending minor title adjustment. That one line sent Janine into a gleeful spiral. "She's cooked," she said. "We've got her on fraud, property damage, and now environmental violations." The DA's office is very interested. But Karen wasn't done. Her delusion ran deeper than I'd imagined, and she proved it one night, just before midnight, when my phone buzzed with an alert from the motion sensors I'd installed along the property line. I'd gone all in on security after the bulldozer incident, adding cameras to the tiki bar roof and a high-powered spotlight rigged to a motion detector. I opened the live feed on my laptop and watched as a blurry figure crept along the side pathway, clutching what looked like a bolt cutter. My heart pounded as I zoomed in. There she was, Karen, in a dark hoodie, her blonde hair tucked under a cap, thinking she could sneak onto my land undetected. She didn't get far. The spotlight snapped on, bathing the beach in blinding white light, and a hidden canister sprayed a burst of blue dye foam, covering her from head to toe. She screamed, dropped the bolt cutter, and bolted back up the hill, slipping in the sand and leaving a trail of glowing blue footprints. I didn't have to call the sheriff. Someone else did. The camera feed was streaming live to a local forum, and one of the viewers, a night owl with a knack for drama, had caught the whole thing and called Rodriguez. By morning, the video was everywhere: community Facebook groups, Reddit, even a local news station that dubbed it the HOA president who couldn't read a fence sign. The replay racked up over 100,000 views, with comments ranging from outrage to memes of Karen as a blue-dyed supervillain. I sat at my table, popcorn in hand, watching the internet tear her apart. It wasn't just satisfying, it was justice, raw and unfiltered. The fallout hit Karen like a tidal wave. The HOA, already reeling from her bulldozer stunt, called an emergency meeting. Leaked emails showed board members scrambling to distance themselves, claiming they'd been misinformed about the beach's status. One demanded a full audit of the HOA's finances, citing suspicious withdrawals tied to Karen's development plan. By the end of the week, the board voted unanimously to strip her of her presidency, revoke her gate access, and freeze any project funding she touched. The woman who'd once ruled the neighborhood with petty fines and a clipboard was now a pariah, unable to get through the front gate without begging. But I wasn't done. The beach was mine again, legally and morally, but I wanted to make sure Karen's defeat was permanent. I hired a local fencing company to build a 12-foot wooden privacy wall along the road-facing edge of my property, reinforced with steel beams and topped with motion sensors and solar lights. It wasn't just a barrier, it was a statement, a fortress that screamed, "This is mine." I also kept the camera feed streaming, now with a watermark, private property, legally owned and monitored. The stream went viral, with people tuning in just to see if Karen would try again. She did, of course. Her midnight dye bath proved that, but every move she made only dug her hole deeper. As the days passed, I walked the beach, inspecting the damage and planning repairs. The dune grass would take years to recover, but the Coastal Land Trust was already talking about restoration grants. The nesting zone was safe, thanks to the injunction, and Dr. Ellis assured me the plovers would return next season. The trench was filled in, the cinder blocks hauled away, but the scars remained, a reminder of what Karen had tried to do. I stood by the tiki bar, running my hand over the ship's will my grandfather had salvaged, and felt a quiet resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person Karen had hurt, every dream she'd exploited, every law she'd broken. She'd wanted to play Queen of the Coast, but she'd picked the wrong kingdom. My beach was my castle, and I'd defend it to the end. The sun was setting over the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples as I stood on my dock, a cold beer in hand, listening to the waves lap against the pilings. The beach was quiet again, the kind of quiet that felt earned, like the calm after a storm you didn't think you'd survive. Karen Mallerie's reign of chaos was over, her dreams of turning my family's legacy into her personal real estate empire crushed under the weight of her own arrogance. The past weeks had been a whirlwind, her fraudulent sales, the bulldozer tearing through my dunes, the blue dye-soaked midnight fiasco that turned her into a local meme. But now, with the county's injunction in place, my land declared a protected conservation area, and Karen's HOA presidency stripped away, I could finally breathe. The tiki bar glowed in the twilight, its weathered wood a testament to my grandfather's hands, and the sand felt like mine again. Yet, I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to vanish quietly. People like her cling to their delusions like life rafts, and I was braced for one last, desperate lunge. It came a week after the access-denied beach bash, the private party I'd thrown to celebrate my victory and reclaim the shoreline. The bash had been magic, tiki torches flickering along the sand, a local barbecue truck serving ribs that melted in your mouth, a DJ spinning beach tunes, and neighbors dancing under a sky lit up with fireworks. The drone I'd hired streamed it live, capturing the joy of a community finally free from Karen's grip. The event wasn't just a party, it was a middle finger to her entitlement, a declaration that this beach wasn't for sale. Not to her, not to anyone. But Karen, true to form, couldn't resist. She tried to sneak in, disguised in a cheap wig and a sun hat, clutching a red Solo cup like she belonged. A teenager with a phone caught her, and the crowd's boos echoed across the sand as off-duty cops escorted her out. The video went viral, racking up millions of views, with captions like Karen's last stand and the beach bandit strikes out. It was the kind of public humiliation that would have broken most people, but Karen wasn't most people. I was back at my kitchen table, sorting through emails from reporters and neighbors when the next blow landed. A certified letter arrived from a new lawyer, some slick out-of-town type Karen had hired after her first one bailed. The letter was a masterpiece of absurdity, accusing me of emotional distress, reputational harm, and financial sabotage. According to Karen, I was responsible for her fall from grace, her inability to get a refinance on her house, the HOA cutting ties, even the fact that no one in town would return her calls. The kicker? She claimed I'd used unlawful social leverage by streaming the dye-soaked footage, ruining her professional standing as a volunteer HOA president. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Professional standing? She was a glorified busybody who'd turned fraud into a side hustle. I handed the letter to Janine, my lawyer, who read it with a grin that could have lit up the room. This woman's threatening legal action because she got caught breaking the law, she said, chuckling. I'm framing this one. It'll look great next to the cease and desist. Janine didn't just dismiss the letter, she obliterated it. She filed a response packed with the security footage, drone videos, and every legal notice we'd served, ensuring no judge would touch Karen's countersuit with a 10-foot pole. The case was tossed before it even reached a hearing, but Karen still didn't quit. She took to the neighborhood forums, posting anonymously under names like Concerned Resident 2025 and Beach Access Advocate. Her rants were unmistakable, caps lock tirades about tyrants abusing conservation laws and rich landowners stealing public beaches. The grammar, the outrage, the sheer desperation, it was Karen through and through. The moderators, fed up with her antics, started banning her accounts, but not before the community piled on, calling her out with screenshots of her own lies. It was like watching a digital bonfire, and I was warming my hands by the flames. Then came her final, pathetic gambit. I got a call from Carla at the county zoning office, her voice tight with irritation. "You're not gonna believe this," she said. "Karen filed a request for an easement to build a public walking path right next to your property. Not on it, but close enough, 10 feet from your boundary. She's claiming it's for community cohesion and scenic access for the elderly." My pulse spiked. This wasn't just another stunt. It was a calculated move to undermine the privacy wall I'd built, to turn my beach into a sideshow for gawkers. I could picture her now, smirking as she filed the paperwork, thinking she'd found a loophole to claw her way back into relevance. I set an appointment with the zoning board immediately and called the Coastal Land Trust, who were ready to fight any move that threatened the conservation status they'd just secured. The hearing was a spectacle. Karen showed up dressed like she was running for mayor, red blazer, hair blown out, a fake smile plastered on like she hadn't been caught red-handed a dozen times. She stood before the board, spinning a tale about how her path would unite the community and provide equitable access to nature. The board listened politely, their faces unreadable, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. I laid out the conservation ruling, presented a notarized statement from the land trust opposing any adjacent development, and shared a report from a state ecologist warning about disruptions to native wildlife. Then, for the knockout, I played the drone footage, just a few seconds of Karen barking orders at the bulldozer crew, standing on my land like she owned it, promising buyers a future that wasn't hers to sell. The room went silent. Karen's face drained of color, her smile collapsing into a thin, trembling line. The board denied the easement unanimously, one member muttering about nuisance applications as Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled. That was the last time I saw her in person, but her story didn't end there. The district attorney's investigation, sparked by Janine's push, uncovered the full scope of her fraud. It wasn't just the 3 families who'd sued. Karen had been quietly collecting planning fees from buyers she'd met at beach expos and online forums, people outside the HOA entirely. The total, according to the DA, topped $70,000, money she'd pocketed for land she didn't own, promises she couldn't keep. The charges piled up: fraud, misrepresentation, illegal land use claims. The courtroom was packed when the case went to trial, filled with homeowners, former HOA board members, even one of Karen's ex-supporters who testified she'd lied about the HOA's jurisdiction to impress an investor. Karen didn't cry or plead. She just sat there, stone-faced, as the judge ordered full restitution to her victims and community service under the Coastal Land Trust's supervision. I heard her first assignment was pulling invasive weeds at the far end of the coastline, no ocean view, just thorns and salt spray. Poetic justice, served cold. With Karen's empire in ruins, I went on the offensive to ensure her defeat was permanent. The 12-foot privacy wall I'd built was already a fortress, but I added a touch of flair, a hand-painted sign at the gate, maritime style, reading private beach, access denied to entitled parties. It was petty, sure, but it was perfect, and it drew chuckles from neighbors who stopped by to share their own Karen horror stories, fines for mailbox colors, bans on vegetable gardens, even a rule against painting a deck because it wasn't aesthetically cohesive. Her downfall was a liberation, a collective sigh of relief for a neighborhood she'd terrorized for too long. The HOA, shaken to its core, restructured. They invited me to join a subcommittee on land stewardship, but I declined. I didn't need a title. I just wanted my peace. I spent my days repainting the tiki bar, replacing dune grass with the land trust's help, watching the plovers return to their nests. The beach felt like mine again, not just in law, but in spirit. And then, as a final touch, I commissioned one last sign, not metal or state-issued, but a simple wooden plank hung near the private path. Carved in deep blue-stained letters, it read, "No trespassing, especially not Karen." It became a local landmark, a selfie spot for tourists, a badge of victory for neighbors. It wasn't about revenge. It was about memory, a reminder of what happens when arrogance meets truth. Karen vanished from town not long after. Her house sold quietly, her name spoken only in past tense, with a mix of relief and disbelief. I heard she'd moved to some inland suburb, probably hoping to start over where her legend hadn't spread. But in the age of drones and live streams, you don't outrun a story like hers. She'd become a cautionary tale, a ghost in memes and court filings, her blue-dyed footprints a punchline that would outlive her. My inbox still buzzed with interview requests, offers to license the drone footage, even a pitch for a podcast called The Great Beach Heist. I turned most of them down, but I kept the sign, the wall, the cameras, symbols of a fight I hadn't wanted, but had won. As I sat on my deck one evening, the ocean stretching out like a promise, I raised my beer to the tide, to justice, to the unyielding truth that some things can't be bought or bullied. This beach was more than sand and water. It was my grandfather's sweat, my father's stories, my vow to keep their legacy alive. Karen had tried to steal it, to rewrite history with a clipboard and a smirk, but she'd crashed against a wall stronger than any she could imagine, the wall of family, of principle, of a man who'd rather burn it all down than let her win. Never try to sell another man's beach, I thought, the words a quiet vow. Because some fights don't just end, they echo, they endure, they carve themselves into the sand and the stars, a warning to the next Karen who dares to try. And as the waves sang their endless song, I smiled, knowing this beach would be mine forever, untouchable, unbroken, and gloriously, defiantly free.